The dust has settled on Oregon's Big Ten championship in Indianapolis over the Penn State Nittany Lions, but now the questions are starting to come to the forefront. Does Oregon's win in their first year in the Big Ten of the Big Ten title, is that going to start to cause change within some of the power players and the rest of the Big Ten Conference? Oh, and there's this thing called the transfer portal. There's a lot to break down in the first 2 days that the portal has opened. We got plenty to cover as we go around in this live edition of Big Nation.
From Pasadena to Piscataway, College Park to the Coliseum, Seattle to State College, Columbus to Camp Randall, the Zoo to the Rock, and everywhere in between. This is where Big Ten fans gather to talk America's premier national conference with your host, Big Ten Ted. All Big Ten, all year long. This is Big Nation.
And hello and welcome to a Tuesday night live edition of Big Nation, where we spin around the whole conference, and boy, we are spinning and spinning and spinning because we've hopped into the portal and it spins and it spins. It takes players from one destination on visits to a lot of other places, and they somehow land up at some other school. So we're going to be talking about the transfer portal. You know, it's been open for a couple of days. You saw kids hopping into the portal, or at least declaring that they were going to go into the portal before that. So really, it's been open for more than 2 days if you really want to factor all of that in. So we're going to be talking about that. I've got a couple of teams that I want to highlight as it pertains to the portal. Some of them maybe a little bit down bad. Some of them certainly trending in the right direction, at least in the early days of the transfer portal. And you know, we got to talk about those Big Ten champions. We got to talk about that team out west. We got to talk about the Oregon Ducks, because they came into the Big Ten right away, man, and they won 10 consecutive games, 10-0. They have never lost a Big Ten Conference game now since they have been Big Ten members. Is this going to start to cause some change? Is this kind of the rattling that the Big Ten needed on the Big Ten cage right now? We're certainly going to talk about that here as time progresses down the line. But before we get into all of that, tomorrow's a big day. Tomorrow's a big day in the Big Ten. Big Ten Network is going to be airing the release of the 2025 schedule. We know what the opponents are going to be, but we don't know when they are going to be. We know when one game is going to be late in September. I think, September 27th, 2025. We're going to have a rematch of the Big Ten championship game when the Oregon Ducks go on the road to State College to take on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Here's the hoping it is going to be a whiteout, but as we know with the Big Ten TV deal, there is certainly no guarantee when it comes to that. So that's going to be going down tomorrow. I will likely have some sort of content reacting to the schedule's releases. It's always fun. You know, we didn't get this until I think the spring last year because of all the realignment and everything that was happening and all the change within the Big Ten. But now we're going to get this, and we're going to have a lot of anticipation. Of course, we won't know what network they're going to be on or what the kickoff times are likely going to be until later on during the summer, of course. But let's start first in talking about those Oregon Ducks. We got to give a round of applause, of course, to engine number 8, the engine that drives the machine that is the Oregon offense. With all due respect, of course, to offensive coordinator Will Stein. Dylan Gabriel, folks, is headed to New York City. Back-to-back Oregon quarterbacks have now been Heisman finalists. Of course, we had Bo Nix last season, and Dylan Gabriel certainly doing it this season. You look at his numbers, completed over 73% of his passes. This is just, what have we found out about Will Stein and Oregon offenses the past couple of years? These quarterbacks have an extremely high efficiency rate. They complete a lot of their passes. Will Stein calls plays, he calls concepts that puts the receivers, tight ends, running backs, everybody into advantageous situations to be able to get the most out of them. Over 3,500 passing yards, 28 scores, another 7 rushing touchdowns. Here's the thing, quickly, that's kind of impressed me about Dylan Gabriel. And it's because he's played a lot of football, right? This is his 6th year and his 3rd school playing college football. He is just, when the moment gets big, he rises to the occasion. That's what's really impressed me about Dylan Gabriel so far. You look at that Ohio State game when he needed to make plays. He made plays and led them to a 32-31 victory over the Ohio State Buckeyes. You look at this last Big Ten championship game against Penn State, had another fantastic game leading this Oregon Ducks offense. I've just been so impressed with what he's been able to do in crunch time types of situations leading this Oregon offense. And now when you get into the college football playoff, you start to look at the other quarterbacks that are in this thing. Will Howard and Curtis Rourke, of course, Drew Aller, the Big Ten quarterbacks. You look at a guy like Quinn Ewers, who hasn't been playing all that great. Cade Klubnik over at Clemson, Nico Iamaleava over at Tennessee. All of a sudden, you start to look and you start to trust Dylan Gabriel a little bit more. What do we know about like the NFL playoffs, which we know college football is becoming more like the NFL now, is, hey, you want to be able to trust your quarterback and you want him to be able to deliver in clutch situations. I don't trust anybody more. When you look at the 12 quarterbacks in the college football playoff, I don't think I trust anybody more than Dylan Gabriel right now. Drew Aller has been very resilient, and he can certainly lead his team on a charge back. But Dylan and what he's doing with this offense, I got a lot of faith in him that he can certainly take it to the next level. Okay. I've heard a lot of questions, and I've heard a lot of this question over the past few days, ever since the Oregon Ducks have won the Big Ten championship. National media folks have been talking about it, and I've kind of been thinking about it here during this season. Does Oregon's Big Ten championship victory and coming into the Big Ten year one and establishing themselves as the program in the conference, is this going to start to ruffle some feathers? Is this going to start to create change? Is this the havoc that is needed, and maybe the slap in the face that was needed for the Big Ten for them to maybe evolve a little bit more and get better overall as a conference? Let's start to answer that question. When you look at what Oregon was able to accomplish this year, of course, 10-0, 9-0 in the regular season, winning the Big Ten championship game, right? That is obviously very impressive when you look at it from 30,000 feet in the air, looking down on Autzen Stadium and beautiful Mount Hood in the state of Oregon. But look at who they beat and look at how they did it, I think is also very impressive when you look at this Oregon Ducks program. They are the only team in Big Ten history to beat Michigan, Michigan State, Ohio State, and Penn State in one single year. They are the first team since 2015 Michigan State, those great Mark D'Antonio teams in East Lansing. They're the first team since that team. They went to the college football playoff. The Spartans did that year, by the way. They are the first club since that group to be able to beat Michigan, Penn State, and Ohio State in the same year. So not only did they go 10-0, they went 10-0 against the historical big boys in the Big Ten, and they certainly laid their claim against those types of competitive football teams. Now, when I start to look at change, and will Oregon's Big Ten championship, Dan Lanning coming in, planting that O in the middle of the Big Ten field, will that start to maybe get some team thinking about change? I think to really discuss this, you gotta start first at the top of the Big Ten. You gotta first start at that top level. Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan. Does Oregon's victory in the Big Ten championship game start to affect them, and how does it affect them? Let's kind of dive into that a little bit. You gotta look at that Ohio State game on October 12th. You got to take a look at the Big Ten championship game, of course, against Penn State. Those were extremely tight games. Of course, Ohio State was maybe a pass interference away to winning that game, kicking a field goal at Autzen Stadium and getting out of there with a victory. You look at that Penn State game, Drew Aller had the ball and they were moving, and an interception away. Great play by Nico Reed, by the way, but an interception away from maybe going down, scoring, 2-point conversion, that ties the game. And then who knows what happens in overtime. But in a phone booth, you look at those teams. Of course, Michigan was a down football team this year. That there's a lot more for Michigan than just that game against the Oregon Ducks right now. But when I look at it against the top teams in the Big Ten, those games were close enough where you're not going to get drastic change, of course, from the Buckeyes and the Nittany Lions, and obviously they're doing just fine right now as college football playoff type of programs. But if Dan Lanning is able to do this consistently and year after year after year, then maybe maybe things are going to change, certainly just a wee bit. But I think something that could also cause some change at the top of the Big Ten right now is what happens maybe off the field and on the recruiting trail, because we talk about what Oregon did on the football field coming into the Big Ten right away and winning this deal. But what did they do in their first two recruiting cycles in the Big Ten? Number one and number one. Two top classes in the Big Ten right out of the gate. Talent acquisition, of course, is so important, and that doesn't even factor in what Dan Lanning and the Ducks have done from a transfer portal perspective. So if Oregon is able to keep on winning, if Oregon is able to keep on developing, and they keep on attracting that top talent, then there might be some things that some of these other programs certainly have to do. But when you look at the top of the Big Ten, I think after 1 year, I'm not sure if any of these teams are certainly panicking at the top, considering how close some of those football games were during the season. But this is certainly a statement, of course, made by the Oregon Ducks. If it keeps on happening on the recruiting trail and on the football field, could this become a Duck dynasty? Let's kind of dive into that a little bit, because the last time we really had a dynasty as far as Big Ten championships were concerned is when Ohio State rattled off 4 consecutive Big Ten championships. Now, here's why I think maybe we're not going to get that type of Duck dynasty, and you're not going to have a bunch of dramatic change at the top of the Big Ten Conference after just one season. It's because this era of the Big Ten and college football, a whole lot different than when Ohio State was able to rattle off all of those conference titles with Urban Meyer. Because remember, that was the East-West split, and when Ohio State was able to beat Michigan all those years consecutively, and then they were able to get to the Big Ten championship, they had a favorable matchup against the West Division winner. Now, when you look at the structure of the Big Ten right now, if Oregon is able to rattle off a 9-0 season, you look at what they had to do. They had to play the Penn State Nittany Lions. You're going to have to play the Ohio States of the world in this game. You're going to have to maybe play the Michigans of the world in this game. You're going to have to play some of the best teams with the elimination of divisions. Just everything in college football, with the elimination of divisions, with the college football playoff, everything is just getting that much more difficult. So be able to make those runs year after year after year. I don't care if you're Oregon or Ohio State or Michigan. Remember, Michigan winning 3 straight Big Ten championships in the divisional era certainly as well. It's just going to be a lot harder to do. But if Oregon is able to do that, if Dante Moore comes in next year and they get whoever coming in out of the transfer portal and they're able to do it next year, and then they're able to do it the year after that, then there's going to be a collective feeling across the Big Ten. It's like, what's going on with us? Why Oregon is able to come into this conference and certainly dominate right out of the gate as well. So the top of the Big Ten, I think for now is fine, but for Oregon to be able to do what they did right out of the gate certainly turns some head a little bit. Now I want to talk about the rest of the Big Ten. I talked about the top. Let's kind of talk about the rest, because here's kind of an overall thought on the conference that I have going forward. Look, I know Indiana's there. They're 11-1 and a great story, and Kurt Cignetti in year number 1 has done a great job. But, we're most years looking at 4-ish teams from the Big Ten Conference getting into the college football playoff, whatever that format that's going to be next year, or of course in 2026, when this thing could certainly change as well. I think Oregon coming into the Big Ten and doing what they did in year number 1, it's going to change more of the bottom 75% or whatever you want to call it in the Big Ten. Maybe then it will change more than those top schools, certainly in the Big Ten Conference. Because when you look at some of those other schools right now, you look at what Iowa historically has been. You look at what Wisconsin was certainly before the coaching change. Those aren't teams that scream explosiveness. Like, the great thing that Oregon has been able to do is they've been able to be the most explosive team on the field, and they've also been able to be the most powerful team on the football field, certainly in the trenches as well. It is going to be extremely difficult. I think going forward for just listing off teams in no particular order, USC, Washington, Wisconsin, Iowa, Minnesota, Nebraska, teams like that, I think going forward with the investment that teams like an Oregon, like an Ohio State, like a Michigan are making at the top, it is going to be tough for those teams to be able to rise into the upper echelon, certainly right now, of the Big Ten Conference. I think Oregon is going to force maybe more change towards those types of teams because they have aspirations to get into the college football playoff. And I think as more time continues to go by and the playoff becomes more of a barometer of success, you're going to have a program like we've seen it with Nebraska's fan base before. USC, right? If USC does not make the playoff for the next 2 years, they don't make the playoff for the next 3 years, and Oregon is doing what they're doing, people are going to start to get impatient because the more time that goes by, the playoff is going to be, especially when it expands most likely to 14 teams in 2026. That's when there's going to be so much more pressure on these other teams to break through into that top four. And what does that take? It takes cash. It takes money. It takes an investment that obviously Oregon has. Obviously Ohio State has. Obviously Michigan certainly has. And I think those teams towards the bottom, what do we know about those kind of mid-tier Big Ten teams right now? Right? Historically, I should say. Right? They've had defense. They've had power. But they haven't had the offensive prowess that a program like Oregon has. You look at a program like the USC Trojans and where they currently sit in the grand scheme of this right now. They, in theory, right, they're more explosive on the perimeter, but they're not as physical and they're not as well built as traditional Big Ten teams on the interior. Where Oregon does it, Oregon is it's a full circle type of program. They have the toughness of physicality to run it down your throat. They have the toughness and physicality to play well in the defensive line, and they have the explosiveness on the offensive side of the football. I think you're going to start to see teams start to replicate that as this time continues to go by with the Oregon Ducks. But there is absolutely no question, there is absolutely no debate. What the Ducks have been able to do right away is going to have a tremendous impact on the Big Ten going forward. Man, it's been so fun to be able to watch this Ducks team and see how successful that they have been able to be right out of the gate right now. I want to get into some comments certainly right here as we get things going here on the show right now as well, because it's been really fun. A lot of people are talking about money and about NIL and about the financial input of some. It's what it takes to win. Right, of course, when we really start to take that next step up, when we really start to take that next step up as college football, where you really got to start investing even more money than what you're doing NIL-wise right now. But yeah, you're certain that is going to be a bigger and bigger part. We're going to get to something a little bit later on during the show where there's a program out there that might not be putting out the highest offers NIL-wise, and it's hurting them currently in the transfer portal right now. Sam Kim comes in and says, the middle of the Big Ten needs help, a lot of catching up to the SEC. We're going to kind of find that out during bowl season. Like, I know there's a lot of opt-outs, and it's really hard to judge during bowl seasons. I'm excited about South Carolina taking on Illinois in a battle of 9-3 type of teams as well in there. So that should certainly be a lot of fun in there. But that is the thing about the Big Ten. I think it's been the case for the Big Ten in the East-West era, and I think it's even the case in the Big Ten here in the divisionless era certainly as well, where you look at those 4 playoff teams and you're looking like they're all, 11-win teams? They're all very good. You kind of get to that next level, and there's got to be more athleticism. You need to get more speed. You need to get more explosiveness. You need you need to get those types of teams certainly in there as well. All right, folks, let's move on and let's talk about the transfer portal right now, because there's a ton to talk about as it pertains to the portal right now. So this thing keeps on spinning. Around and around and around the transfer portal goes. The portal has been open now for a couple of days, and I want to make sure that I talk about a couple of teams, some takeaways from a couple of teams, and really takeaways in the early part, because now this is where we start really planning for 2025 and rosters really start to kind of come into, start to really form a little bit. Okay, the first team that I have to talk about, I absolutely have to talk about right now is the USC Trojans. They lost a couple of key impact players. Now, some of those players that they're certainly were expecting to go into the transfer portal. Of course, you got to talk about Miller Moss, the quarterback for the Trojans right now. Of course, he got benched later on in the season. So it was a given that he was going to go into the transfer portal. That's obviously no huge surprise. Bear Alexander, he had that redshirt situation early into the season. So we know that he was going to go into the portal. He's been contacted by Penn State. He's been contacted by Oregon as well. So we'll see if maybe SMU is thrown in there as well, but the two Big Ten teams. So we'll see if that can maybe circle around to have some good luck. Certainly with them. You look at Mason Murphy, wasn't exactly number one at the top of the list in terms of favorite players for the USC fan base as well. But then you kind of dive into some of these other ones. Let's talk about Deuce Robinson. Deuce Robinson, that one happened on Tuesday in the afternoon, towards the evening, and there is rumblings coming out of Southern California that maybe that could be the start of the wave of some other players to be able to hop into the transfer portal, certainly as well. And you look at Kyron Hudson, who is also in the transfer portal. All of a sudden, that great class from a couple of years ago is starting to maybe not be on campus at the University of Southern California. And that's going to hurt because that was a big selling point when Lincoln Riley first came into this program, was this great class that he certainly had right away. But now you're starting to see what's happening with the portal certainly as well. And then you got to talk about Quentin Joyner. Quentin Joyner at running back, right? He backed up Woody Marks this season. Woody Marks rushed for over 1,000 yards this year. And I thought Quentin Joyner, when he got in the game, I thought he proved that he was a more than capable backup running back, and he more than proved his talent and how much more touches that he should be getting. I really thought they underutilized Quentin Joyner this season out there in Los Angeles. But let's talk about Quentin Joyner and kind of what he leaves behind at the running back position. You've got Brian Jackson in there. You've got Amarian Peterson in there. And that essentially gets you to the guys that have had significant, well, maybe even not significant, just experience in general at the running back position. USC is a team that has a ton of portal needs. They are one of those teams out there. They need to hammer and hammer and hammer the transfer portal and be able to backfill some of these roles and to be able to potentially strengthen their team. So at running back, that's where it really starts. They signed two running backs in the class of 25 just a couple of a week or so ago on the early signing period. Harry Dalton, who was a 4-star, Riley Wormley, who was a 3-star. So there needs to be something there here for the USC Trojans. I would take a peek at Washington State's Wayshawn Parker. He was a freshman this year up there in Pullman, 735 yards and 4 touchdowns. He's from the state. He's from the Golden State. He's from the Sacramento area. I would take a look at him. He was able to get explosive a few times for Washington State, certainly this season. But if I'm looking at what USC has at the running back position right now, they need a couple of guys probably. No matter how you feel about Brian Jackson, no matter how you feel about Amarian Peterson, you're looking probably at multiple guys out of the portal at the running back position to come into USC. Look what they did with Woody. Look what they did with Woody Marks. Okay, they got him out of the portal from Mississippi State, and he had the best season since Ronald Jones at the running back position. So they can do it. They have proven and they have shown that they can certainly make this happen. Okay, let's continue for USC because there are a couple of position groups to certainly talk about here with the USC Trojans. Let's start and let's talk about the offensive line. There's a potential that USC's offensive line could be replacing 3 starters up front. I talked about Mason Murphy, who was starting at tackle. You're looking at Emmanuel Pregnon and Jonah Monheim. They technically have 1 year of eligibility remaining, but I think we saw Emmanuel Pregnon go into the Senior Bowl or the Shrine Bowl or one of those bowls, which usually signifies that their career is done. Jonah Monheim, of course, had a decent year over there at center. And then you look into the second team offensive line. This is a group that just needed to get better in general. And then when you're losing that many starting players, it really shines a spotlight on just how much better that they need to get at that position. If they don't backfill significantly, and you've got Jaden Maiava back there at quarterback, let's just say, it couldn't be the best year in 2025, certainly for the USC Trojans. So that is a big need. You go to the defensive line. So this is an interesting skill group for the Trojans. You lose Jameel Muhammad. You're going to lose Nate Clifton. But you got a decent group of players coming back. Gavin Meyer's going to come back. Braylon Shelby's going to come back. Cameron Fountain, right, who they're very excited about, a young player that's coming back. Anthony Lucas was injured this year. He's going to be coming back. Kobe Pepe, Jade Abasiri. There's a decent amount of names right there, but even with those names, they still need to get better in the interior of the defensive line. Plain and simple. And we'll see how many of those guys certainly stay around here in the next couple of weeks or whatever. But that's a group that just needs to be better up front. Now, here's what I will say about USC and their defense, specifically their defensive line. Look, I think that they made big strides certainly this season, but I look at a lot of that group that I just mentioned. When you look at Shelby, young guy, Fountain, young guy, Abasiri, young guy, there's a lot of youth and there's a lot of dependence, I think, for Eric Henderson to be able to continue to develop these guys. But I do have faith that they can continue to develop. But, if they want to compete at the highest level in the Big Ten, and that's the thing about USC, they don't want to go 6-6. They don't want to go 8-4. They want to compete and win 10 games every year. And if you want to win 10 games every year, that defensive line, that offensive line, it's just not good enough. It's just not good enough. So you need to be able to hit the portal extremely hard. I think a position group that USC just needs to absolutely hammer, maybe more than any, is the secondary. They're losing a lot in the secondary. Even though they're going to retain guys like Kamari Ramsey and John Humphrey back there, you lose Jalen Smith, you lose Akili Arnold, you lose Greedy Vance in there. You need multiple pieces. I would take a peek at Darren Johnson, who is from Northwestern. He started every game for the Wildcats over the past 2 seasons. So I would kind of take a peek in that direction right now if I am the USC Trojans. But it is very and abundantly clear USC needs to be one of the most portal-heavy teams in the Big Ten, if not all of college football. If they're not, if they lose a lot of talent and they're not able to backfill with equal or better replacements, could we see a third straight season at USC with either 6 or 7 regular season wins? I think it's possible. Let's move on to another team that has suffered a good amount of losses. Let's talk about the Nebraska Cornhuskers right now. The title of this is What's Happening at Nebraska? Now, before I maybe get into the departing players, let's start first with the positive. There were rumors out there. They were circling, man. They were certainly circling about maybe Miami offering a bag to Dylan Raiola. So things were kind of circling, but Dylan Raiola on Instagram says, hey, I'm all in. I'm certainly coming back. If Dylan Raiola would not have returned, this thing really would have went south. This thing really would have spiraled out of control for the folks over there in Lincoln, Nebraska. But he's back. Emmett Johnson went into the portal for a couple of days. He withdrew, so he's coming back to Lincoln, Nebraska as well. That's a big keep, I guess, because he went out and came back in. Dante Dowdle and Emmett Johnson as a 1-2 in the running game is a big deal, I think, for this Nebraska team. So they've certainly got pieces to build around on the offensive side of the ball. But really where you start to grow some concern for Nebraska is on the defensive side of the ball. Of course, we know Tony White leaving Nebraska to be the defensive coordinator over at Florida State. They have since named their defensive coaching staff. They are promoting John Butler to be the new defensive coordinator over there at Nebraska. So you lose Jamari Butler, you lose Principal Uman Mielen, you lose James Williams. Man, those are 3 key pieces on the defensive line. You lose Makai Bayer in the linebacking core. I got Malachi Coleman and Gabe Irvin Jr. and certainly on there on the offensive side. But when we're talking about this on the defensive side for Nebraska, I think that's a team that needs to maybe try to rebuild their interior, their front seven, a little bit more in the transfer portal. Ty Robinson is gone on that defensive line, so you're losing a lot of effective players that you had up front. Nash Hutmaker, the Polar Bear, can technically come back for one more year, but once again, they're gonna need some help on the defensive line. Look, they've been able to recruit at a solid level these first couple of years under Matt Rule, but are those kids going to be ready to step up into a big situation? MJ Sherman's going to have to step up. Cameron Lenhart is another guy that's going to have to step up next year on defense for the Nebraska Cornhuskers as well. You know, some guys from former Big Ten players that I'd maybe take a peek at. Cole Brevard from Purdue, big body in the middle, 6'3", 335 pounds. He started for them. And then James Thompson Jr. He was out for the season for Wisconsin, but he's more, certainly not as big as Cole Brevard, but he's more of an athletic guy that can create havoc, certainly coming off of the edge as well. And then you look at the linebacker position for Nebraska. You're going to lose John Bullock to graduation. I talked about Bayer, Stephon Thompson, Javen Wright. They're all gone. So Nebraska is going to need to go hard into the portal as in terms of repopulating their front seven as well. I think Nebraska needs to get better also on the edge at wide receiver to be able to get more explosive, to be able to help Dylan Raiola out on the offensive side of the football as well. Let's move on to maybe some more macro Big Ten talk as it pertains to the transfer portal. What's the most important position on the football field? Of course, it is the quarterback position. Now, the first two teams on this list, the Michigan Wolverines and the Iowa Hawkeyes, teams that could possibly be after a quarterback in this transfer portal cycle. Now, we talked about Miller Moss going into the portal before. Michigan and Iowa have been both tied to Miller Moss early on in this period. I want to first start with the Michigan Wolverines. Let's start first and talk about Michigan. Bryce Underwood. The big $64,000 question with Michigan is, do you want to play Bryce Underwood game one right away? You look at their non-conference schedule, they have to play Oklahoma in the non-conference. Otherwise, there's a favorable period for 3 games there for the Michigan Wolverines for Bryce Underwood to be able to learn possibly right away. And then you look at Miller Moss. This was a guy that got benched, as we said before, during his time over at USC. But I think the system at USC required more and put more pressure on Miller Moss, where you're throwing the ball 35, 40 times a game. Look, I don't think we know there's going to be a new offensive coordinator coming into Michigan. The word on the street is that could happen in the next day or two. The word on the street is NFL head coaching experience. So let her fly on your theories when it comes to that and who's going to be the next offensive coordinator over there at the University of Michigan. But I think that the question that Michigan needs to answer is, if we bring in a portal quarterback, is there going to be enough assurance that they are going to start the entire year? Because I think there's a situation, we get to game 5, 6, whatever, we get to the middle of the Big Ten schedule and Bryce Underwood is starting to pick up this playbook. We know the talent that he has. If this transfer quarterback, whoever it is, they got a couple of bad series, a bad game, 2 bad games, they're going to be clamoring for Bryce Underwood. So there's going to be that whole dynamic to talk about in the transfer portal. But I think with maybe less pressure on the quarterback to make plays in a Michigan offense, I think Miller Moss could fit well. When Miller really got depended on a lot and they put a lot of pressure and a lot of responsibility on him, right? What did he throw? 50 passes in that game against Washington in which they lost. You know, that's when things, and when the offensive and when the pressure kind of got to him a little bit more, that's when things really started to go the wrong direction, certainly for Miller Moss at quarterback for USC. And then I'll say this about Iowa as it pertains to Miller. Don't go to Iowa. Don't go to Iowa. I mean, dude, I love the Hawkeyes. Hawkeyes, I love you. Kirk Ferentz, I love you. But Tim Lester and Brendan Sullivan has one more year of eligibility, right? They have a relationship. Tim Lester recruited Brendan Sullivan coming out of high school. If I'm a transfer quarterback, I'm not touching that. because of that, one. And number two, this is a heavy run scheme that they're running at the University of Iowa right now. Even though they're going to lose Caleb Johnson, who is one of the best running backs in all of college football, you got Kamari Moulton. Fun fact, Kamari Moulton was RB1 on the very first depth chart for Iowa this season. It's crazy to think about since, what you saw with Caleb Johnson certainly over there, but it's true. And then Jazz Patterson has been in that program for a little bit, and he's a hard runner as well. So if I'm a quarterback, I'm shying away from Iowa. I think it's going to be Brendan Sullivan this year. Of course, you got Jackson Stratton in there, and it's going to be heavy run scheme, and I just think that's the way it's going to go. So, yeah, I know there's going to be money thrown out there. There was money thrown out there for Cade McNamara. Didn't exactly work out. Certainly over there as well. Let's talk about the Wisconsin Badgers right now. So they lose Tyler Van Dyke. There's a very strong possibility that Wisconsin, for the third consecutive year, in the third year of Luke Fickell, will have a transfer portal quarterback. You kind of hope by this time that you would have had some stability at this position if you're the staff, but Wisconsin has had anything other than stability and an identity, right? They're bringing in a new offensive coordinator. He was officially named today. Jeff Grimes from Kansas is coming over. Now, the good thing that I like about the Jeff Grimes hire for the Badgers coming over from the Jayhawks is he has said he is going to instill that power type of identity and that power type of mindset in the run game for Wisconsin. So I don't think there's going to be a ton of pressure on the Wisconsin quarterback to come in here, whoever it may be, to light the world on fire. I don't think it's going to be Braden Locke. Now, they got a kid, high 3-star, low 4-star, and maybe Matoyer that came in during last year's class. He was a freshman this last season. Is he ready to go? I'm not sure right now. They got a couple of kids in this class, in Landon Locke and Carter Smith. So we'll see if they're able to pan out right now. But this is a Wisconsin program that's certainly going to be looking to the transfer portal yet again at the quarterback position. Let's talk about the Bruins of UCLA down there in Westwood. So Ethan Garbers is out of eligibility. They had a guy, if you watch the UCLA Penn State game this year, they had a guy by the name of Justin Martin. He actually played pretty decently, but you guessed it, he's in the transfer portal over there for the Bruins. So they got a guy by the name of DeMarcius Davis. He was originally at Washington, but then Washington got DeMond Williams after Jedd Fisch kind of came over. DeMarcius Davis, long story short, whatever, he's ended up at UCLA. Is he going to be ready to go? I'm not completely, absolute, 100% certain right now. And here's another thing about the future of the quarterback position for the UCLA Bruins. They lost Madden Amaliava, a 4-star, on signing day. He flipped over to Arkansas. So there is a desperate need at quarterback right now for the UCLA Bruins. Is Deshaun Foster going to be able to wield that money to be able to get an effective quarterback right now? Otherwise, they're going to be riding with a young, unproven quarterback like DeMarcius Davis over there at UCLA. You look at Minnesota, who's also on this list. Max Brosmer out of eligibility. Minnesota-ish finds themselves in a very similar situation to what UCLA was, right? You kind of lose an experienced quarterback. You got a quarterback. They got Drake Lindsley in there that says maybe he could be ready, but I see a lot of Minnesota fans saying, hey, I want this guy in the portal. I want that guy in the portal. Hey, Minnesota got a portal quarterback last year with Max Brosmer. He ended up being a top 6 quarterback in the Big Ten. So we'll see if they can do that again. I think that they're going to be after a portal quarterback to be, and the Purdue's just got to replace everybody. They got to put Barry Odom, the new head coach. He's got to find every position, right? It's one of those kinds of teams. Indiana's a very interesting case study, certainly as well. You have Curtis Rourke, of course, who now will exhume his eligibility once their playoff run is done at IU. Now, you got a guy in Taven Jackson that you had who was originally went to Tennessee. He's a local Indiana kid. He originally went to Tennessee. And then after a year there, loaded quarterback room, Nico coming in, he transferred back to IU. That was when Tom Allen was still the head coach, and then he was the backup. Played the Washington game, and he was fine. But I'm very curious to see how this current coaching staff, Kurt Cignetti, the head coach, of course, and Mike Shanahan, the offensive coordinator, how do they view him right now at the quarterback position in terms of the future for Indiana, because it's very clear that Indiana's NIL game is exactly where it should be, and it's very clear that if you're a quarterback and you see what Curtis Rourke was able to do, Indiana is certainly a place where you can develop in an offensive culture. So Indiana could be a pretty hot spot maybe for the quarterback position as well. There could be some other teams certainly in this conversation as far as transfer portal quarterbacks if they're still unsure of what they have in that position, but those are certainly the teams that are looking for that type of position improvement as well. Let's take a look at some final notes, some other notes that I have as far as the transfer portal is concerned. I was just talking about Wisconsin losing Tyler Van Dyke, and I mean, year 3, at this point, you really want to start to see that progression forward for your football program. I just don't think we're seeing it all that much right now with the Wisconsin Badgers. I talked about Tyler Van Dyke. You lose a promising wide receiver in Trechka Kahuna. You lose James Thompson Jr. and Kurt Neal on the defensive line. Like and then you lose Elijah Hills, if I'm not mistaken. There's a lot that needs to be replaced on a unit that just wasn't that great to begin with on the defensive line for Wisconsin. They went heavy into the portal at the linebacker position last year, and I think it's clear to me they weren't the best at identifying good talent. It looked good, right? That, hey, that guy might be exciting, put up these types of numbers at this level of football, but it didn't really pan out. So talent identification needs to get better at Wisconsin. And you go look at their 2025 schedule. It's not promising. It's not promising for Luke Fickell and this program coming up next season. We were just talking about UCLA. Let's talk about them again. So not only did they lose Ethan Garbers to graduation, they not only lose Justin Martin to the transfer portal, they lose 2 of their top producers in terms of skill positions on offense. You look at Logan Loya, TJ Harden. Look, I know TJ Harden took a step down, and of course, this was a team that fired their offensive coordinator, but they hired somebody from Indiana's staff, so they certainly upgraded from Eric Bieniemy at the offensive coordinator position at UCLA. But losing a guy like TJ Harden, that certainly hurts a little bit. UCLA is kind of that program that certainly needs to be able to build back in the transfer portal as well. You know, early in these portal periods, you see a lot of this with certain teams. Hey, we lost this guy, we lost this guy, we lost this guy, we lost that guy. But this thing can rise up. This is a world of college football where things can change very, very quickly. Will UCLA or Wisconsin be those teams to rise up and get some good talent? It might be a while before we find out over there as well. We had Devin Brown transfer out of Ohio State. I think that's setting up well for Julian Sayin to definitely be the guy next year at quarterback for Ohio State. I know Lincoln Kienholz and Aaron Nolan could possibly be in that quarterback room as well. Here's the interesting thing that I want to talk about with Purdue. Their new head coach, Barry Odom, had his press conference today, and I was kind of listening to that live while I was working. And I look at the players that are in the portal right now, the significant players that are in the transfer portal for the Purdue Boilermakers. And I'm looking at these guys and the offers that they have, and it boggles your mind, and maybe it speaks to what Ryan Walters was not able to do. When you look at Max Clare, their tight end, maybe not the biggest tight end in the world, but he can do a lot of things in the football field. They're leaning towards Notre Dame. Look, you're a tight end at Notre Dame. You got talent that usually ends up pretty well for you. So he's getting an offer there. How about their edge rusher, Will Helt? LSU's looking at him. Texas A&M is looking at him. Certainly over there, Jerron Tibbs, USC is looking at him over there. And, of course, the big one, right? The prize in the group is Dylan Thieneman. Dylan Thieneman is a fantastic safety. He is reportedly getting visits, Ohio State and Oregon. Dylan Thieneman will be going to both of those locations. Can you imagine an Ohio State defensive backfield with Caleb Downs and Dylan Thieneman in the same defensive backfield? That's crazy. If Dylan Thieneman is able to end up in Eugene, Oregon, he will be a cornerstone to rebuilding a secondary that will mostly all be gone from what is currently on campus right now. So he makes great plays on the football. He's great at coming up and stopping the run. I love what Dylan Thieneman does at the safety position, and you can tell with Oregon, Ohio State, there's some SEC programs certainly in there as well. Like, you can tell just how they think of him as well. Like Yanni Karlaftis, Kindrich Breedlove got an offer, I think, from a Big Ten team today. It was a USC. I can't exactly remember who it was off the top of my head. But you've got a lot of these Purdue players that are getting significant looks from other big-time other programs as well. So when it comes to the transfer portal, here's where I want to wrap up. You know, there's a guy by the name of Caleb Brown. A handful of years ago, maybe I should say, was a 4-star prospect wide receiver. He's about 5'10", 200 pounds. You know, he's more of a slot guy that's going to come out there and be a weapon over there. He started at Ohio State. If you're a receiver and you go to Ohio State, it usually means that you're very highly thought of at that position, considering the track record for wide receivers for the Buckeyes. But then he transfers to Iowa, and when you're a wide receiver and you go to Iowa, you're not going to put up the biggest numbers in the world. Now, not this year, but last year, towards the end of the year, before he got injured, he really started to pick up steam. He really started to play better towards the end of the season. I firmly believe Caleb Brown is a really, really good talent. And if Caleb Brown goes to a team with an offense that takes advantage of his skill set and his speed, I think that he certainly still has gas left in the tank to be able to provide something right now. So I think that he could be somebody that's kind of flying under the radar. He could be somebody that's flying under the radar that's maybe not being talked about a ton, but if he's added to a championship level roster, I think he could be a really solid number 3 type of option for somebody out there. So the transfer portal keeps on spinning. The transfer portal giveth, the transfer portal taketh. Whew. Take a deep breath. Everything's going to be all right. All right, I want to finish this show by getting into some comments here as we finish things up over there. Want to hear everybody's thoughts on the transfer portal and what we've certainly seen so far. Maybe some guys that you want your team to go after, or maybe some guys that you certainly left as well as we continue to kind of spin around this thing as well. Here, and I'm just going to start taking comments. We'll go in any direction this thing goes. Here from Bobby D. No one would ever go 16-0 again. It would be legendary. I kind of talked about this on the weekend, and there were some people that brought up some points. 16-0, does that qualify them for the conversation of maybe being mentioned with some of the best teams of all time? Now, here's the thing. Going 16-0 through the gauntlet, you know, winning the Big Ten Conference and what they would have to do in the college football playoff, it would be ultra impressive talent-wise. I'm not sure if they match up with 2019 LSU and, these 95 Nebraskas, these 0-1 Miami teams, but it would certainly be one of the most impressive seasons in college football history. I will certainly say that. And to the commenter's point there, to Bobby's point, it is going to be tough, man. Like, especially these Power 2 teams. It is going to be insanely difficult to go through a Big Ten schedule or an SEC schedule where you're playing big teams, where you're playing big brands, and then you got to play in your conference championship game, whether you win or lose. And then you got to go through the best of the best in the college football playoff. Man, that is not going to be easy. Let me tell you that one. And here, I don't think it's the real David Portnoy, but that is the name of the commenter. Oregon will be considered the greatest team of all time if they run the show. You know, this has gotten a lot of traction. I might have to do a different a dedicated commentary on this as well. Darius P. chiming in. The Oregon offense will be awesome next year. They need more O-line and safeties. That is very true. Very true. Oregon in the running. They are one of the 3 finalists for the Joe Moore Award right now. It's them, it's Army, and it's Texas. We'll see if the Ducks are able to take it home. They were a finalist for last year's award. Of course, Washington was able to win that specific award last season. But I've from everything that I've heard so far, Oregon is certainly in a position where they are going to be very aggressive in the transfer portal. Like, if there's one thing that I trust about Dan Lanning, is he is so good. He's got a great staff. He's so good at managing a roster, even though when the portal opens and early signing day, when all these things are at such weird and terrible times, he finds a way, maybe better than anybody, to get it done. Andrew Mormon coming in. McClellan and Lowe look good this year. Yeah, I like Justice Lowe and how he kind of filled in. I think that's when Tez went down? There's just been a few times this season where Justice Lowe has come up big in big situations. So, yeah, I like what he can provide next year. We'll see. Evan Stewart is kind of on the fringe, certainly right now, so that will be very interesting as well. Andrew also says more. Gary Bryant Jr. is probably going to be back. Yes. Jerry Dickey, the former 5-star, Kyler Casper, he's saying that they are probably out. So we'll see. I mean, if you lose, of course, you're going to lose Tez. If you lose Evan Stewart and you talk about those guys, they might have to dip into the portal a little bit more at wide receiver than anticipated. But here's the deal, man. I think for next year, for the Oregon Ducks, I certainly think DeCorian Moore is going to play a significant role. We'll see how much of a role that Dallas Wilson is able to play. But he mentioned Jeremiah McClellan before. Ryan Pelham was also a 4-star wide receiver from last year's class as well. That they need to that certainly they could be able to utilize this upcoming season as well. It's going to be a fun transfer portal period as this continues to progress forward as well. Well, I think that'll wrap things up here as we continue to go through the transfer portal season. Of course, there's going to be a lot of content dropping here on the channel. So if you haven't subscribed, if you haven't liked already, that would be much preferred to stay. It's more for you, right? It's more for you, so you're kind of in the know of what's happening. Certainly over here at the channel as well. So, got to make sure I clear this chat before we get out of here as well. So, until next time, I'm Big Ten Ted. We will see you in the next edition of Big Nation.
Thank you for watching and listening to Big Nation. Make sure to subscribe and follow Big Ten Ted on X, YouTube, and podcast platforms to stay in the know on all things Big Ten football.